So as you've probably seen, my FDM printer is not that well honed in. I printed it at 0.2, but even so, there are some slight jagged lines still. But so far, we have put in, I've put in two layers of wood filler. So the first around the edges, very thick, on top, very watered down. I've let it dry, I've done the same again. I've then sanded around the edges just to really kind of smooth it down. And then I've applied 2 coats of spray putty over the top. I have been going around trying to clip little bits as I've gone along just to try and help with any inconsistencies from the FDM printer. And now I'm going to go and hopefully apply the final coat of spray putty. Okay, so I've added the additional coat of spray putty. I think it's covered a lot of it. The rock and the tall leaves I wasn't overly happy with, so I've added a bit more wood filler over them, and I'll prepare that for the final coat of spray primer. That's the old school way. I wasn't too worried about the base because I'm going to get my old brush with a bit of PLA glue and start putting that just all over where I can get into in and around the base. Being careful around the foot area because you don't want to make your life harder in the long run. I really do want to try and get it up into the greenery or this stuff, just because I haven't got the best print here. But I want to get that as much around as possible. And I don't know if anyone's ever done the old school Warhammer basing days, but I do have my old tray, which has a mix of sort of mainly grit rocks, but then you've also got sort of slightly larger rocks. Yeah, just a whole range of miniature sized rocks, just so, oh, and sand of course, because I just find you want to have as much a range of shapes as possible. As you know, I'm not going to do it all on camera, just kind of sprinkle it over the PLA, really fill it up, and then when you're ready, shake it all off, and kind of work around until you're happy with the baseline of the base. So I just went over that, picked a few bits that weren't covered from the first one. And I'm relatively happy, so I'm going to add the second coat of spray putty, or actually the 4th coat in total. So this is now the final coat of the spray putty, on top of course, all the sort of sand and rocks that I've added. So hope that looks a little bit better. Still a little bit to dry, so once that dries, I'm going to add just all over it some really cheap brown paint. The brown's still drying, so it looks way better now than it will do once it's dried. But I'm just going round and just very quickly slapping on some of this green and letting it, again, I guess slightly merge in with the brown. I think whilst it's underwater, it's going to have that sort of uneven mixtured effect. So hopefully you can see, I'm literally just quickly going around, building up all the green around all of this, say, foliage. So I finished all the green, and because I've done it at the same time as the brown's drying, it's got a nice, I guess, hopefully, shadowy effect or transition effect between the 3 colours. Whilst the brown is also still drying, I'm just dabbing it, and I do mean dabbing, just with the green. I find it just helps create a bit of a 2-colour undertone. Even though we'll dry brush this, I think it's quite nice to get that slightly differing effect. Now just slapping on some grey, mix of cheap black and white acrylic over the top of the rock. When I get to the edges, I'm just going to try and, I don't know if this stippling is the right word, but just going to try and make it a jagged edge as it meets the brown. We'll add the shade in after this, and it should just help bring all 3 of those colours relatively nicely together, at least for a first starting point. Okay, so I've got all the basic colours on. I'm not too worried about the slight lack of coverage in some areas with the brown. Normally I'd want to use an Agrax earth shade or a dark brown wash at this point, mainly because of the greens and the browns, but I'm really low and particularly for something large like a base, I don't really like wasting expensive washes like your Citadels. I have found something like a dipping formula, any kind of big black wash or ink that for me is very dark, but I nearly always mix it 50-50 with water. I'd probably recommend sort of a medium, especially in this instance. It does usually end up being a bit glossier than like a normal shade, so it's not my ideal outcome, but it helps add all the depth, and I think in this instance I'm going to mainly be doing dry brushing over it, so it should cover up any overly glossy finish that it leaves. So I'm going to go over all of this now, and then I'll come back. So now, as you can see, I really have just coated the entire thing in the black wash, and I think you see with just the three colours, the one colour of wash, it's really brought all of that together. So I'll wait for that to dry, and then I'll start with the dry brushing. So the base is now dry. This really has brought all the colours down. As I've always mentioned, I can be a bit lazy with bases. I'm trying to put a bit more effort in as time goes on. But for brown, I've actually found that if you just want to bring the colour out, I mean, if you want to create a more gradual transition, it's possibly worth doing a light brown and then a Zandri dust. But for such a small, or any cream or light colour, but for such a small base, particularly the fact that I just kind of want to blend it around the green, and I think the Zandri dust has worked there. So I really do want a very, very dry brush. I just do it on my hand because I feel like it comes off very easily. But you can still see there's plenty on the brush still. And so I just want to go over all of this, just giving it that light brush. I find that this colour over brown, I can't really describe what it is other than it just seems to work. It brings up the colour but keeps some really strong recesses, and I think that if I just hit it on the green, it's not really going to make a massive difference and will hopefully help. So I'm going to go around all of this carefully with the Zandri dust, and then I'll come back. Okay, so just from that one dry brush of Zandri dust, I think it's really brought out the colour of the base, particularly picked out those stones, I think naturally just from the dry brush and the fact they're higher up, and I think it just, yeah, really differentiates the base. As I said, you could bring that up further or add a gradient in between the darker brown and the Zandri dust, but I never have. I now want to focus on the green, so I'm using Warpstone Glow. Same again, extreme dry brush. So I'll test it on my hands. And now, I mean, predominantly I want to focus on these areas, and the reason for this is just these are very, very delicate. I think if I start dry brushing them too heavily, there's a good chance I'm going to snap them. So I'm just going to focus on the bottom parts, lightly touch them if I can, but I'm going to go across the taller parts with a paintbrush. So again, I'll just go around. I've been around with that Warpstone Glow dry brush. I have gone round, I guess, with one dry brush, but I've been around a few times just to make sure that I didn't miss any of those kind, hidden or slightly lower lying parts. Now that I've done that, I just want to highlight as well that I have touched some of the green onto the brown, and it's just in preparation from some of these little grass or fake grass tufts. I get these from warpainter.net. I just think they're really nice just to throw in. I do use grass flock, but I think these just add a little bit of variance. So I think that by kind of adding some of the green around the brown where I add it in, it will help it blend, as it were. So now I just want to take my brush, very small brush, again with some of that Warpstone Glow. I want to water it down a little bit, but I'm not as worried when it comes to a base. And just for some of these taller points, just want to lash. Honestly, this is actually too small a brush. Again, still want it watery. And just bring it up very carefully. I don't want to damage these, but I do want them to have a more solid coat. I won't go all the way to the bottom, as you'd expect. And when it gets to that bottom piece, I'm just going to bring that down with a bit of water just to help with the transition. So I'll let that dry. As I said, you see it's kind of slowly mixing. I'll let it dry, and I'll add the second coat and just blend those in. I just want to make sure these higher points really are a much more solid green. Doing slightly incorrectly before, just thought I'd add it, is still with my watery brush, should be bracing upwards. You can see hopefully as I move the brush upwards and finish at the top of the stroke, it really is pushing all of the paint up to the top. So it's kind of helping me create that gradient without the water. So I'm just going to do that, let it dry, and then apply a second, I guess, swipe moving up. Kind of gone round, just kept on going round on the watery Warpstone Glow. I've now got the Warboss green, and you can see it's still a little bit wet. I'm now just a little bit further up, hopefully blending it in because it's still wet, just trying to add a brighter green nearer the top of these. So I want to focus on the taller ones first, but I will probably just touch some of those shorter ones as well to help with the transition. The good chance after this, I'm seeing it's quite stark, I'll add a green wash just to help blend in those three colours. To this from a project management perspective, and for some reason I lost track. I agree that the base would have been the first thing to start with, but actually because the rock is so big and it's much easier to do a dry brush with a bigger brush, I should have done the rock next and then worked onto the green, because I could have neatened up the green and then worked around it. And predominantly on the green I've used the brush as opposed to the dry brush. It again would have just minimised my risk. So just as a point, I am, before I finish off the green now, just jumping onto this rock so that if I do hit any of these outer green, I can neaten it up with the final coat. So hopefully you can see here I've got a bit of white and it's mixed in with black to give me this much darker grey, and a tiny more white at the moment. And I do this just so that as I start the dry brush, I can start off relatively dark. It's a nice way, particularly when you've got a cheap white and a cheap black. And I can just apply like a really heavy dry brush. You can see already it's pretty much the same colour as it was before. So I'm just getting... But now I want to grab a bit more white, pop it into that grey, make it a little bit lighter, dry my brush off again. I'm always happy with a rock to do a heavy dry brush because I think it can add quite a nice effect. I really don't want to go near the brown, but I will go and neaten up in a moment. So is that in the camera? Yeah. That's the last one on that colour. I just want to bring out these edges here. And I'm happy for this to stay in shade anyway. I just want to get around these edges. So now I want to get a bit more whites and really mix that into a much lighter grey, and just start, still too much of the brush. So I don't mind with rocks it being a bit of a heavier dry brush than the normal. I just think inconsistencies can look quite good. So again, I don't want to be as focused on everything, but you know, it's a small rock and you do want to get the edges. So I might as well just bring that colour up a bit with the lighter grey. And now I'm going to grab my white tube again and wash out my brush. Make sure the brush really is dry, because you don't want to kind of get that watery streak as opposed to just a dry over brush. Okay, hopefully I can just get just the white, or 99% of just the white on my brush. And now hopefully I can just hit some of the edges, and I really do think bringing stone up to white looks the best. It's maybe a personal preference, but I think in most cases the light really does hit those jagged elements of the rock, or even just sharper points. I'm going to go one more time. I feel like that's not bright enough. Yeah, okay, I'll pick that one. And then this highlight here on the top. So nice and easy, just quick mixing of dry brushing, but I hope it just helps bring the look of the rock out. A bit more on the front, just so where it's facing. Back to the green. I'm using the Warboss green again, but I've gone down to a much smaller paintbrush. And at this time I really do just want to keep it very at the top. so just as much as possible towards the top. I also don't want to end on any straight lines. I feel like it can end up showing up if I go down certain edges. I'm going to pick some of these top points as well, just to help the light. This is the front, so make sure we get both sides. Don't get that straight line. And I'll go around all of this, and I'd say from that point, at least from the base painting of the base, I'd say we're pretty much done. So I've just popped them on base, just to get an idea of how it looks. I'd always recommend as you go along putting the model together, does it all make sense? But here I think, one, it's a bit too bright for the type of model, and I definitely don't want this base to detract from the model. And two, I do still see some obvious shifts in colour between the two greens. So for that reason, I want to darken it down and merge those colours in together. So I'm going to use my green shade, which is Beeltan green. Get my medium size, say medium to maybe slightly big size brush. As I said, I don't want to get much of this shade on the base, but at the same time, I don't intend to be too neat about it. So if I just pick something like this, this is my Beeltan green on a very big and unfocused brush. I just want to slap it all over. See, I want to push it down to the base, but I don't need to force it right to the bottom or be too neat. But just in case I do, I've included these, I've printed off these 3 little fish. They are from Thingiverse, so just searched fish. This was probably the only good one that I could find, and actually I really do like it. The eyes were separate, so they're a bit of a pain in the arse to stick on. Try to add some directional looks to some of them. But I'm going to get through this pretty quickly. I've looked through a couple of pictures. I've got an idea of what I want, but I'm just going to try some stuff out. So this is Skarsnik green. It's one of the greens I actually very rarely use, or I probably should use it more, because it does have a really nice sort of top highlight. But I just want to get this on as a, say, semi-base layer, because I want to add over some sort of metallic mediums and inks. I hope that will just help give it a bit of a shimmer, as you would see on fish scales. And then I just want to paint in the eyes, add a little bit of flavour to the lips. Okay, so I've painted all these fish with the Skarsnik green. I've now taken essentially a metallic medium for airbrushes, but I just find it can be quite nice to add a shimmer to certain things. And then I wanted to add some colour into it, so I firstly added it to a turquoise ink that we have here, and then I'm just going to now do the same again. As I said, a lot of this I'm making up as I go along. I am wasting this for the amount of painting I'm doing, but at the same time I need it to I don't want it to be overbeared by the ink. Got 2 drops into that. So I do then just want to make sure my brush is watered down, so I do want it to be a bit thinner. See, they're not far off, looking quite similar colours. They're super thinned out as well. And what I want to do is start off with this initial turquoise and paint it down the base of this fish. Just wash my brush off a bit, dab it off. Then now take this, sorry, it was a clover green, and then paint it over the front. They're very similar colours, particularly when I'm adding it over this this Skarsnik green. But I really hope it's going to help add like a really nice shimmer to the fish. Yeah, there wasn't enough colour change in my opinion, so I did want to add a bit more. So I changed, I added 2 drops of the blue ink. It was a navy blue ink. Apologies, no, it was a blueberry blue ink. And I've just added that back over the front, the fish. Now with a watered brush, I just want to make sure again, I'm blending that down, just so there's not, look, you can see now, that's a very obvious line. If I add a bit of water, I'm a bit careful about it. I don't know, it just helps. You can see there's a bit more, so I can take a bit of this blue, help that transition. So I wasn't happy with the coverage of the first coat, so I'm literally just going back and doing exactly the same process of the turquoise ink and metallic medium on the back, and then the blueberry ink with metallic medium on the front. I'll then just get a bit of water, a lot less so on the second coat because I think it's already pretty blended, but just making sure kind of no off lines. So I think hopefully you can see I'm not putting too much effort in, but I think that's a nice little shiny transition. As I said, the metallic medium will really help with that scale effect. Okay, so I really do like the transition and the shine in it, but I think it needs a bit of depth. So I've just decided to go with a watered down Dragonhof Nightshade, and so I take a bit off my brush, don't overbear it. And now I just want to apply it over the whole thing. I want to be very careful. Well, I say careful, I don't want to really overshadow anything or take away the shine that we've created from the metallic medium, but I do want to make sure that particularly the scales are all visible. I'll come back to that high scale in a moment. So I'll just go around the three fish with the Dragonhof Nightshade. So I've been around the eyes with a mix of flayed one flesh and white, and put in a black dot. I'm now just going around the edges with a glaze, Laymenter's yellow, so it's just a yellow glaze. I just felt like a glaze would work a bit better than a wash around these eyes, and I have, yeah, I'm not very good with small items, a bit less on the brush. I just want to go around the edge of the eye. I think it brings the eye and the blue together. I think it also adds like a really nice sort of tint to the blue around the eye. Oh god, I hope that was in camera. Just one more time. Just around all of the eye. And hopefully you can see the kind of deeper recess, but that yellow tint it's given to the blue. So I've now added Zandri Dust to the teeth and Bugman's Glow to the lips. So I obviously use Zandri Dust first and Bugman's Glow to clean up and apply the lips. I'm now going to add Seraphim Sepia to the teeth, and I'm going to try it to the lips as well. I think we'll just add a different tone. I don't know how to describe what this colour is other than I use it on sand to create like a bone effect. So yeah, this is the shade I'm going to use. So I'm all done with the fish. No, it's not much effort, but I think it looks nice. I think the Seraphim Sepia worked really well on the lips actually, and I think it's a nice addition to the base. The light probably get that. So I've got the little fish that I want to put on the base. I may have mentioned, but I've been tinkering around with the idea of filling this base up maybe about a centimetre, maybe two, with epoxy resin. So I've been doing some tests, and more to this colour, more to this side is the colour I want to go for. So it'd be better if it has a white behind it, as you can see. So of course over the brown it'll be nearly negligible, but yeah, I kind of wanted to add a bit more colour. I may add a tad more green when I get around to it. I'm going to use this, it's just cake wrap that I've cut to size, so when I'm ready I'll stick that round. It'll be a pain to get off. And I've got these little tufts from warpainter.net. I think they're awesome. I've got a bunch of them. And I think they work really well to kind of separate flock. Now I'm not going to use any green flock on this, but I wanted to get it into some of the spaces, just work out where I want it. Right, so now I've kind of figured that out, what I'm going to do is take some of these off, apply some super glue to the base of them, just because when I put the epoxy resin, this will not be enough to keep it down. So I'm going to be pretty loving with the glue, if that's the right word. And just in those areas, now I really do want to get it into that space. Sorry if you can't properly see, but now I've kind of really pushed it into that crack. So that's where my first one is. I'll get the fish out of the way. And I'm just going to go around now with all of these, position the fish and glue them all down. Right, so I've glued everything down. I added a few extra tufts in there as well, and I'm happy with the base. So I'm going to wrap this round and glue it with super glue to stop any of the epoxy resin coming out. I'm going to try and be as light as possible with the super glue so that I can still tear it off the edges without creating too much damage. Yeah, I'm going to kind of see how that goes and play it by ear. Right, so there's no turning back now. I'm not particularly happy about the fact it's not a circle, but yeah, it had to be that way based on the fact that some of these leaves were sticking out. So I'm going to go away and use a 2-part epoxy with the turquoise and blueberry ink. Once I've mixed the epoxy really well, I'm just going to drop each of these in separately and not stir, so literally just move the container it's in, and I hope the pouring process will just kind of help move it around, but I don't want to mix the colors up too much. So yeah, I'll come back once I've kind of got the mixture ready. So I've now mixed in this it's the epoxy mix with the turquoise and the blue. All I've done is I've dropped them in and I've taken a stick and just cut it up. So I haven't stirred, I've literally just cut those colours a little bit together. And really now it's the moment of truth where I'm going to very carefully pour it into the base. I'm going to do this off camera. Okay, so it's all filled in. I'm quite terrified, if I'm honest. I'm just keeping an eye on anything for any chance of seeping, but it seems to be maintaining and leveling at the moment. So yeah, it's a case of fingers crossed. I'll come back and check in about 5 hours. I'm not saying it'll be dry by then, but at least I'll have an idea of if I have any issues. And of course I'm going to continue checking on it to make sure there are no leaks or just general issues. So fingers crossed. So it's been probably about 18 to 20 hours. Obviously I felt it was still a little bit tacky last night. Went to bed and I've obviously been working today, so I say nearly even 24 hours. Starting to take this off now. I have already removed the sellotape, so I did wrap 3 rotations of sellotape around the plastic once I'd finished, just to help with the seal. And now just very carefully, so at the moment of truth, slowly taking this off. As expected, not particularly happy with the lack of, say, roundness now to the base. But I'm going to do a little bit of sanding on that, bit of work around. I think I'll be happy. So, hopefully you can see, I want to make a few points. One, it ended up a bit more bubbly than I wanted it to. It was purely because I was too ferocious when I was stirring the 2 parts. So I was just really mixing it in. Got a bit, I say, distracted or just overzealous, and yeah, I just ended up with lots of bubbles. So I put it over a flat surface and very carefully kind of tried to stir as many out, but it still ended up with quite, I'd say, a too bubbly consistency. The colour, I think, is really good. I can still see through, see the rocks in between. Still just about see the fish. It's much more visible to me than it is in the camera. And yeah, I personally think it adds a really nice touch to the base and to the model. So I'm going to go around now and just start the sanding process, finish off the black. And I've noticed a few little touches I need to make on the model before we're finished. I've got it all off. I went around with a Stanley knife just to kind of get off some of the edges in these corners here. I really like it. It's a lot more transparent. I can see through this screen, so I really can see all the detail inside of the epoxy resin. I've also gone around just once with black. I'll probably do another 1 or 2 coats just to thicken it out. And then just a personal comment, it does have some slight inconsistencies in the shape due to the plant. I kind of thought if I were to do it again, I may have cut some of these outer plants off just so I could have gotten exactly a smooth circle, as I kind of seem to have a lot more on this side. So I like my little fishes popping out, and I really think it's added a lot to the base. As a final run around, I just wanted to highlight a few little things that I'm going to do. I found a little red mark on the back of Yoda. I'm just going to touch up those two with a bit of Xandri dust. I felt like the eye for this eye needed a little bit neatening up on this side, so I've been around that. I've also been around the base twice more with black, and I decided not to sand it because it was actually really smooth, and I didn't feel like I could have kind of fixed this edge without kind of essentially impacting the model itself. So I'm actually happy with the finish. Now the last thing I want to do, just to, I guess, finish the model, and the reason for this personally is because I think if he's in water and you're kind of walking through the swamps, I don't know if you can see I've already started it, but it's unlikely you're just going to have the bottom soles of your feet wet. You know, there's going to be splashback, you're going to get a bit wet further up your body. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm using this Vallejo still water. It takes bloody ages to dry, which is a pain, but if you can see, I've poured some into my palette. I've got my relatively big sized brush and I'm soaking it all up. And now I'm trying to face it upwards because I'm going to try and get as little as possible onto the resin. And I'm just going to start flicking it around the lower half of the body. And the reason for this is I just think it will really help bring together that wet look. Oh, where's it gone? It will start bringing together that wet look, really just start hopefully blending that leg in with a bit more of a water effect. So obviously I want to build it up more directly towards the resin, the epoxy resin, and a bit less so as I go further up. But that's just my final little touch. I just think it will hopefully add a little bit of flair and realism to someone standing in the water. I really hope you've enjoyed the process. I've really enjoyed painting this model, so I'm going to go take some nice pictures, add them in, and start on the next project. Cheers.